This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
And welcome to the program. I'm Roby Brock. We're glad to have you with us. This past week, Governor Asa Hutchinson successful in passing his Arkansas Works plan through a special session of the state legislature. Big majorities in both chambers, 70% in the House, 71% in the Senate. And while those numbers were big, if those votes indicate funding support for Arkansas Works, they aren't big enough. Joining me to discuss is State Senator Jim Hendren, the Senate Majority Leader, who had a very successful week this last week. Congratulations.
Thank you, Roby. It's great to be here, and it was a good week.
Why was it such a good week? Why do you think there was such broad support for this?
Well, Roby, I think people realize this is the result of a lot of work on behalf of the task force, which has worked over a year. The governor has put a lot of effort into it. There's been a lot of back and forth and compromise and discussion. We came to a bill that not everyone was thrilled about, but everyone was happy with, or most people were happy with. 70 to 71% are happy with. So that's a good start. Anytime you can get that kind of margin on a piece of legislation that really affects so many people and so many dollars, that's a victory.
Well, obviously the 75% threshold for funding is going to be the next hurdle you guys have to clear. So I guess it's more than a $64 million question. It's much more than that. How are you going to get the 2 votes that you still need in the Senate? How are you going to get 5 more votes in the House?
We're going to do just what we've been doing for the last year, which is try to help people understand the ramifications of having this program or not having this program for the state, for the budget, for the hospitals, and for the thousands of people that are involved in this. And I think that once people see that, they'll understand that it's probably not the one to start blocking appropriations on. Obviously, you can have your say on policy, which we did this week. You can voice your opposition to the program. But to really take the step of shutting down the Department of Human Services because you're opposed to that policy, I think when people see the ramifications of that, we'll get the votes.
So your colleague, State Senator Bart Hester from Cave Springs, says we're playing some pretty hard chicken right now with both people's feet on the accelerator. I think the only thing that's going to bring resolution to this is a crash. He seems a little bit more apocalyptic about this coming debate. Tell me why it's not going to be a crash.
Well, I think there's a few flaws in that analogy. What we are doing is the same thing that we always do. We're passing policy, and then we're coming into the fiscal session to fund the policies and the agencies that implement that policy. That's not our foot on an accelerator. That's not driving towards anything reckless. In fact, I would argue that failing to do those things, which are responsible government, is reckless. So I think that we are proceeding on a path. The governor is determined to provide stability, to provide continuity for these people, to provide stability in the budget. And yeah, there's no doubt that there's always drama in the legislature. There's some who hope there's drama, and I think some trying to maybe make some drama. But at the end of the day, you know, I've been doing this a while, and usually the legislature comes through and does what's right for the state. So I'm confident we'll get there.
So there's some pretty hardened opponents of the Arkansas Works plan, of Obamacare, private option, Medicaid expansion, whatever you want to call it or however you want to tag it. Do you give them an opportunity to try to run their version of what they want to see from a funding standpoint? Because it would be clear to me that there's not going to be a supermajority of support for their version of funding either.
I think what we do is we do what we've always done, which we fund the agencies to implement the policy that's been passed by the General Assembly. It's a dangerous precedent to let people start stripping and pulling and manipulating the budget because they're unhappy with the policy. Do we do the same thing to the Department of Education because we're unhappy with an education policy? Do we do the same thing to the Department of Health, the Department of Corrections? Where does it end? So what I expect is we'll have a budget, we'll have an appropriation bill to fund the Department of Human Services, similar to what we've had in years past, and members are going to have to make a decision. Do they really feel strongly enough about defeating this policy that they're willing to basically refuse to appropriate the money for that agency?
At the last minute, the governor pulled from consideration his managed care bill for this special session. There's obviously an alternative out there in Diamond Care. You guys have been studying this. Your committee, your task force was split on that when it came to kind of deciding a vote. Does that factor into this fiscal decision, this fiscal conversation? You know,
I don't think so. I think obviously there are still a lot of people who are very concerned about which path we take towards those savings. The good news is we're agreed that there's going to be some savings, and there's some disagreement about how we get there. But really, I think that debate is separate and should be separate and apart from the debate about funding Medicaid expansion. Whether we have Medicaid expansion or not, if we find a way to save $1 billion to $1.4 billion out of traditional Medicaid and also improve the quality of services, we certainly should all agree that's the right path forward. So there are going to be continuing discussions. There's going to be continuing negotiations. I saw good in both of those plans. Both of them have some very innovative ideas about how to save money. But I really do think that is a separate and apart debate from the private option.
And that'll come in another special session, you think?
I don't know if it'll come in a special session or it will be a process that evolves over the upcoming months and is actually implemented in the General Assembly in January. Most states, when they implement managed care or they they start dramatic reforms, do it on a more piecemeal basis than just overnight doing that. So we may go through a process rather than just this is how we fix it. So I don't know how that's going to work out yet. I'm trying to solve one problem at a time, and obviously we've got our plate full next week.
All right, State Senator Jim Hendren, thank you so much.
Robbie.
Appreciate you, and congratulations. We'll be watching what happens going forward.